When we talk about the nerve centers of the global economy, we tend to think of places like Wall Street or the City of London or maybe Silicon Valley. But the truth is, the place that can give the entire system a genuine real-life heart attack, it's a narrow strip of water. Many of us have heard its name, but very few really grasp its importance. Today, we're going to dive deep into the Strait of Hormuz. We're not just looking at it as a place on a map, but as what it truly is, the single most critical, and I think you'll see, most fragile component of the modern world we all live in.
Right, let's just start with this quote because it sets the stage perfectly. Our source material calls the strait the actual physical heartbeat of global commerce. Now that is not an exaggeration, it's not hyperbole for dramatic effect, it's a statement of fact. This whole story isn't just about oil tankers moving from point A to point B, it's about a fundamental vulnerability that is literally woven into the fabric of our globalized civilization.
So, to really bring this home for you, let's ask a question. What is the one common thread that connects the gasoline in your car, the electricity that's powering the lights in your room right now, and even the final price tag on something like an iPhone? The answer, you might be surprised, isn't a famous company or some kind of new technology.
It's this: a 21-mile wide strip of water halfway across the planet. And really, understanding how this one single geographic feature holds so much sway, well, that's the key to understanding global economics, modern geopolitics, and all of the hidden costs that are embedded in nearly every single product you buy.
Okay, so here's our roadmap for this deep dive. First, we're going to look at the sheer physical constraints in the 2-mile artery. Then we're going to debunk the idea of easy workarounds in the 8 million barrel problem. After that, we'll get into the fascinating financial side of things with the invisible war risk tax. Then we'll zoom out to see the impact on entire continents in a global energy crisis. And finally, we'll trace it all the way down to your wallet in from crude to your cart.
So let's begin with the ground truth, the physical reality of the strait, because the numbers you often hear thrown around are, frankly, dangerously misleading. You'll almost always hear that at its narrowest point, the Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide. And, on the surface, that sounds pretty wide, right? Sounds like there's plenty of room to maneuver. But for the absolutely colossal ships that are the lifeblood of the world's energy supply, that 21-mile number, it's a total illusion. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look at this comparison. It tells the whole story. You have to understand, a modern supertanker, what's called a very large crude carrier, or VLCC, is a true monster of the seas. We're talking about a vessel that's longer than 3 football fields laid end to end. It's massive. And because of its size and its draft, it needs incredibly deep water to operate safely. So that 21-mile width is irrelevant, because most of it is too shallow or obstructed by islands. The actual path these ships can take is a highly regulated maritime highway called a traffic separation scheme. And what that boils down to is a 2-mile wide lane for ships going out of the Persian Gulf and another 2-mile wide lane for ships coming in. That's it. The entire energy supply for much of Asia and Europe is being squeezed through a channel just 2 miles wide. It's not a strait, it's a claustrophobic 2-lane artery with absolutely zero room for error.
And through that tiny 2-mile artery flows this number: 21 million barrels of oil every single day. To put that in perspective, that's somewhere between 20 and 30% of all the oil the entire world consumes daily. It's almost 3 times the amount of oil that passes through the Suez Canal. So picture this. You have these massive, slow-moving, incredibly vulnerable tankers, each one carrying a cargo worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and they are all being funneled through this one constricted point. The potential for a catastrophic accident or a deliberate disruption is just immense.
Okay, so the immediate question anyone would ask is, well, what about a plan B? If this choke point is so obviously critical, surely there must be workarounds, right? Well, this is where we have to look at the cold, hard math of infrastructure. And let me tell you, the numbers do not lie. This chart really lays out the core of the problem perfectly. There are basically only 2 major pipeline systems built for this exact purpose, to bypass the strait. The first is Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline. At its absolute maximum redlining capacity, it can move maybe 5 to 7 million barrels a day over to the Red Sea. The second is the UAE's Habshan-Fujairah pipeline, which has a capacity of about 1.5 million barrels. So let's be generous, let's add them up. If both pipelines are running at peak performance, 24/7 without a single issue, your total bypass capacity is about 8 million barrels per day.
And that brings us to the bottom line. It's simple arithmetic. The strait handles 21 million barrels. The pipelines can handle 8 million. 21 minus 8 leaves a 13 million barrel per day shortfall. That oil is effectively trapped. It has nowhere to go. There is no other pipeline.
There's no other route. There's no physical infrastructure anywhere on Earth that can pick up that slack. If the Strait of Hormuz closes, that 13 million barrels of oil stops flowing to the world market. Full stop.
Now here's a really crucial point. A crisis in the Strait doesn't even need a full-blown closure to cause a global economic shock. You don't have to sink a single ship. All you have to do is make the idea of shipping through the area feel risky. And that brings us to the financial mechanics of this choke point. And to really get this, we need to look back at a little bit of history.
See, we don't have to imagine what happens when this region gets hot. We've seen it before. During the Iran-Iraq War back in the 1980s, both countries started attacking each other's oil exports. This phase of the conflict became known as the Tanker War. And we're talking about real attacks, sea mines, anti-ship missiles, raids from helicopter gunships. Over 400 civilian commercial vessels were hit. Things got so bad that the U.S. Navy had to launch something called Operation Earnest Will, which was the largest naval convoy operation since the Second World War, just to escort tankers safely through the strait. So this isn't some theoretical risk. It's a historical precedent that created the financial tools that are still used today.
And that historical risk leads us directly to this really powerful financial weapon. See, the entire global shipping industry is insured by massive syndicates, the most famous of which is Lloyd's of London. There's a committee there called the Joint War Committee, and it has the power to designate any waterway in the world a listed area, which is just insurance speak for high risk. As soon as that happens, any ship that wants to sail through that area has to pay a hefty extra fee on its insurance policy, and that fee is called the war risk premium.
So let's just walk through exactly how this invisible tax gets levied. First, some kind of geopolitical event happens. Tensions flare up in the Gulf. In response, those insurers in London declare the region a listed area. Immediately, the war risk premium, which is normally a tiny fraction of a percent, can skyrocket. It can jump to 1, even 2% of the total value of the ship and its cargo. So let's put numbers on that. A single supertanker and its 2 million barrels of crude can easily be worth $250 million. A 2% premium means the shipping company has to write a check for an extra $5 million in cash for one trip. And believe me, they do not absorb that cost. They immediately pass it on to the oil company, who passes it to the refinery, who passes it straight to us at the pump.
So we've covered the physical choke point and the financial weapons. Now let's look at the real-world ripple effect on two of the planet's biggest economic blocks, starting with Europe. You know, oil always gets the headlines, but the Strait of Hormuz is every bit as vital for liquefied natural gas, or LNG. In recent years, especially after moving away from Russian pipeline gas, Europe has become incredibly dependent on LNG that's shipped by sea. Well, one of the world's absolute biggest LNG exporters is Qatar, located right inside the Persian Gulf, and 100%, literally every single cubic foot of LNG that leaves Qatar must pass through the Strait of Hormuz. So a disruption, or even just a slowdown from those high insurance premiums, means an immediate energy deficit for Europe. And since natural gas is a primary fuel for generating electricity, when LNG shipments get delayed, the wholesale price of power in places like Germany, the UK, and Italy spikes almost instantly. That means higher utility bills for millions of households.
Now, if the situation is bad for Europe, for Asia, it's nothing short of catastrophic. This chart just lays out the staggering dependency. You have nations like Japan and South Korea. These are major industrial powerhouses with almost zero domestic energy resources of their own. They import somewhere between 80 and 90% of all their crude oil from the Middle East, and every drop of it transits the strait. If that supply is even threatened, they are forced into what the market calls panic buying. They have to go out on the open market and try to outbid everyone else for the limited oil that's available from other places, which sends global prices into the stratosphere and creates this vicious cycle of scarcity and price hikes.
Now, a lot of countries do have a buffer. It's called the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or SPR. And these are basically giant stockpiles of crude oil saved for exactly this kind of emergency. But, and this is the crucial part, they are a temporary band-aid. They are not a cure. The best way to think about it is like a canteen of water in the desert. It'll keep you alive for a little while, but it can't make it rain. Releasing oil from the SPR can calm market panic for a few weeks, maybe a month at most. But it cannot solve a long-term structural supply deficit of 13 to 21 million barrels a day. Eventually, the reserves would simply run dry.
All right, this brings us to our final section, and it's where the rubber really meets the road. This is where we connect a geopolitical standoff in the Persian Gulf directly to the price of the goods in your local shopping cart. This is the inflationary butterfly effect, where one single event can have these far-reaching and really unexpected consequences across the entire global economy. Let's just trace the chain reaction, step by step. It all starts with tension in the straits. That immediately causes crude oil prices to spike.
because of fear and those war risk premiums we talked about. That directly raises the cost of fuel for container ships and diesel for trucks. That's step 3. But it goes so much deeper. Crude oil is the primary feedstock for the entire petrochemical industry. That means the cost of manufacturing plastics, synthetic fibers for your clothes, fertilizers for growing food, all of it goes up. So suddenly, everything in the world costs more to make, and it costs more to transport. The end result is a new wave of global inflation that hits every single consumer everywhere.
And this is just a brilliant, concrete example of that interconnectedness. Think about it. A factory in Vietnam that makes sneakers. All of a sudden, the synthetic materials they need for the shoes are more expensive. The electricity to run the factory, which is probably generated from imported fossil fuels, costs more. And then, the fuel needed to put those finished sneakers onto a container ship and get them to a store in Europe or America, that costs dramatically more. The factory's profit margin gets squeezed from every direction, all because of a political or military event happening thousands of miles away in a 2-mile-wide shipping lane. That right there is the hidden, fragile reality of our modern global supply chain.
Which leads us to this final, really powerful idea. We hear politicians talk about energy independence all the time. But what the Strait of Hormuz proves is that in a globally traded, interconnected commodities market, that concept, it's mostly a myth. Even if a country produces every single drop of oil it consumes, the price it pays for that oil is set by global supply and demand. A disruption in the strait will raise the price for everyone, everywhere, regardless of where their specific oil comes from. There is simply no escaping the interconnectedness of this market.
So we'll end with this final thought to leave you with. We have built this incredibly complex, incredibly efficient global system. But it's very hard. The physical artery that keeps the entire thing alive is only 2 miles wide, and it's located in one of the most volatile regions on Earth. And that just begs the question that I think we should all be asking. What does that incredible vulnerability tell us about the overall health and the resilience of the global economy we all depend on?